Mr. Whitmore, thank you for joining us. I firstly wanted to ask you about the most current topic of conversation. Everyone is talking about an upcoming large Ukrainian counteroffensive. At the same time, a lot of people have been saying there might be a lack of ammunition or equipment. How critical will these issues be? What do you expect will happen with the forthcoming counteroffensive?
Насколько это, на ваш взгляд, критично? Что вы ожидаете от предстоящего контрнаступления?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that throughout this war, Ukraine has overperformed and surprised even its most ardent supporters. So I think we underestimate Ukraine and their armed forces at our own risk right now. We're all expecting the counteroffensive to start soon. We're all expecting, although there might be some surprises, but a lot of the expert opinion is that it's going to be toward the south and the southeast, in the direction of Melitopol or maybe Mariupol. I think the goal there, the objective is going to be to split Russian forces in the north and the south of the Donbass and in southern Ukraine, and that this would allow Ukraine to take back considerable amount of territory. We of course don't know how that's going to go. But we do know what's happened so far. And we know that Ukraine has surprised us. They surprised us in Kharkiv. They surprised us in Kherson. And again, I'll say we underestimate them anybody else underestimates them at their own risk. Now, yeah, there's problems. Wars are contingent on a lot of things. And yeah, Ukraine is running into shortage of artillery. So is Russia, by the way. And if you step back and look at the big picture of this, and I would say there was an excellent report that was just put out by the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington that was looking at the effect of sanctions on the Russian defense industry. And one of the big conclusions that came out of this report is that over time, Russia is evading sanctions, but over time, their armaments are deteriorating, right? They're getting worse. Ukraine, on the other hand, is getting better and better Western armaments. So if you look at the trajectory, if you look at two sides in a war, and one side's armaments are getting better and the other sides are getting worse, that would seem to favor Ukraine over the long run. To do so, the fact that they're on the left bank near Kherson is not that surprising, actually, quite frankly. It's not surprising at all. We'll see if Ukraine can succeed in splitting Russian forces and cutting off Russian supply lines. If that happens, then I think a Ukrainian victory is possible in a shorter time frame than we imagine. But we have to wait. Everything's contingent on how this spring offensive goes at the moment. Russia's winter offensive went nowhere, and now it's Ukraine's turn, and we'll see where that goes.
Давайте представим, ведь такой шанс есть.
Let's imagine the not impossible scenario where the Ukrainian counteroffensive does not live up to expectations, and the gains are minimal. In that situation, how realistic do you think the proposals of certain politicians, including those anonymously providing information to Western media sources, who think Kiev may have to start thinking about territorial concessions? Could you imagine such a situation?
Вы можете себе это представить?
Well, I'm always suspicious when I hear people who are not Ukrainians talking about how Ukraine should negotiate away its territory. When I hear these comments, whether it's from the president of France or the president of Brazil or from members of our American Congress, my first question is, okay, which parts of France do you want to give to Mr. Putin in the interest of stability? Which parts of Brazil do you want to give to President Putin? What parts of America do you want to give to them? We're talking about something that isn't ours to give. When I hear the Ukrainians say they are ready to negotiate territory, then I will take it seriously, but not until. This is their country and it's their future. And I am staunchly opposed to any efforts from Ukraine's friends and partners of telling them that they should give away part of their country to an aggressor and a war criminal. who is basically committing genocide on their territory. I will believe that when I hear it from the Ukrainians. I know there are figures here in Washington and in every Western capital that would really just like to get back to business as usual and to push for a negotiated settlement. There are those that have sincere fears of this conflict escalating and metastasizing to potentially involve NATO. I understand those fears. As far as I'm concerned right now, President Biden has been saying again and again and again, we're with Ukraine as long as it takes. I take my president at his word there. So until I hear it from the Ukrainians that they want to negotiate, I'm not going to take any calls for negotiations seriously.
Есть очень важное направление, которое сейчас активно...
Crimea is currently a very active topic of discussion. It is thought that Ukraine, soon after resuming large-scale military operations, may try to logistically isolate the peninsula. How realistic do you think it is?
Вот это можно себе вообразить, насколько это реалистично?
Yeah, I do think it's possible. I mean, we have to see how far this spring offensive goes. If Ukraine can split the Russian forces, that would by definition cut off the supply lines and cut off Crimea. Right? They'd have to take out the Kerch Bridge as well. The liberation of Crimea is not out of the question, right? It's not out of the question. It's not a crazy idea. In a lot of ways, some are arguing, and I find this argument very interesting, some are arguing that it would be actually easier if you cut it off to liberate Crimea than the rest of the Donbass, because the rest of the Donbass has a land border with Russia. Crimea would be cut off from Russia entirely.
Господин Whitmore, у меня складывается такое впечатление, что перед моментом X
Mr. Whitmore, there is a sense right now that we are drowning in anticipatory disinformation. Lots of different messages and sources, leaks of Pentagon documents. There was even a rumor that Kiev was planning an attack in Moscow scheduled for the 24th of February 2023, the anniversary of the invasion. The story goes that the idea was met with resistance from Washington, and the armed forces of Ukraine ultimately changed their minds. How convinced are you by this?
Насколько это для вас звучит убедительно?
Well, I mean, it's possible. I mean, attacking Russian cities is more possible than attacking Moscow. I'm unaware of what kind of assets Ukraine has inside the Russian Federation to do that. But I also know that the United States is very, I'll say the Biden administration is a bit nervous about Ukraine hitting Russia with American weapons. Again, this fear that exists here in Washington and every Western capital of the conflict metastasizing and escalating to include NATO. My personal opinion is I think these fears are misplaced, to be honest. And I don't like that we tend to put handcuffs on Ukraine with regard to this. Imagine if when we were giving weapons to Great Britain during the Second World War, we said, well, you can't use these weapons to hit Germany. That would be absurd, right? So I disagree respectfully disagree with the administration on this, but I know there are real fears about American weapons being used to hit any Russian target inside the Russian Federation. Now, Crimea is a different case because as far as international law goes, Crimea is part of Ukraine and Ukraine has the right to liberate that with American weapons or otherwise, right? But there are real fears about if a Russian city is hit with an American weapon, what that could lead to.
Do you think that Russia is prepared to escalate the conflict?
I don't think so, but I'm telling you what the thinking of a lot of people in the administration is, and they have bigger responsibilities for the security of our country in that sense. So I kind of defer to them, but I think no. Russia's ability to project power is severely limited right now. We're seeing it across, not just in Ukraine, but across the former Soviet space, where Russia is losing influence in places like Kazakhstan, like places like Georgia, and places like Armenia. We're seeing kind of this shrinking of Moscow's ability to project power. So that leads me to believe that if they can't project power in the former Soviet space, I don't think they're going to be able to project power into the NATO space, right? So I am not worried about this escalation. I understand that the Biden administration has to be. It's their job, right? They have to prepare for the worst case scenario. As an independent analyst, I think we should not be so afraid of winning. The West should not be afraid of Ukraine winning. And we should be talking about this conflict in terms of Ukraine winning. Because I think if Ukraine wins this conflict, this is the best for everybody. Not just, first and foremost, the Ukrainians, of course. For us in the West who have lost our faith in, many of whom have lost faith in democracy, the fact that the Ukrainians are fighting and dying and winning to preserve democracy could inspire us in the West. Across the former Soviet space, this is going to be good for the Georgians. It's going to be good for the Armenians. It's going to be good for maybe even the Belarusians. Because I actually think if Ukraine wins this war, which I think there's a chance they will, a good chance they will, we're going to have a 1989 moment where Moscow's ability to project force is going to be diminished, and we're going to have another flowering of democracy in Eastern Europe in this sense. And then at the end of the day, this is going to be the best thing that ever happened to Russia, quite frankly, because it will defeat this destructive imperial mindset that has held Russia back and kept it from reaching its potential. So I think this will be good for everybody, and we should stop fearing victory.
Не могу с вами не согласиться, господин Whitmore, но...
I can't disagree with you, Mr. Whitmore, but there are lots of reasons to be concerned, especially for Ukrainians. Yes, Joe Biden declares support for Ukraine and says that support will last for as long as it is needed. But at the same time, there are those in the West calling for an end to the war and for the start of negotiations. Furthermore, some warn that the United States may simply run out of resources or that the U.S. may stop sending weapons in the quantity required by Ukraine because of the looming elections or a number of other reasons. At this moment in time, the United States refuses to send combat aircraft, fighter jets to Ukraine, refuses to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine, refuses to provide long-range weapon systems. So there is a line they won't cross.
То есть существует все-таки красная черта.
Well, they're constantly the red lines are constantly moving, quite frankly. I mean, I would like to hear a change in rhetoric. Instead of President Biden saying we're going to be with Ukraine as long as it takes, I would add two words to that: as long as it takes to win. As long as it takes for Ukraine to win. We are with Ukraine until they win. Those are the words I'd love to hear my president say. In terms of the weapon systems, we've gone through this song and dance throughout the entire war. We had the debate about the javelins. We said no. Finally, we said yes. We had the debate about the HIMARS. We said no. Then we said yes. We had the debate about the Patriots. We said no. Then we said yes. I suspect we had the debate about the tanks. We said no. Then we said yes. Everything, and we're going to get there. This has happened throughout the war. The same pattern has repeated itself. Now, I imagine if we were giving all these weapons to Ukraine in February of last year, my God, imagine what the position would be in right now, right? But unfortunately, that's water under the bridge. But I suspect we're going to get there with the F-16s.
Как вы думаете, когда мы с вами сможем встретиться и записать...
When do you think we'll be able to talk again under a new set of circumstances, where the situation will be completely different? A month? 2? More?
Для этого потребуется времени? Месяц, два, больше?
Not a month. not a month. No, I think this is probably, depending on how this counteroffensive goes. But we're not talking months. We're probably talking a year, if not year. A year, if not years, is my guess. But I'm not good at predicting military outcomes because they're very, very contingent. And if Ukraine is successful in the spring offensive, splits Russian forces, cuts off Crimea, then I think months. But if not, we could be looking at years.
Господин Whitmore, спасибо вам большое.
Mr. Whitmore, thank you very much for speaking with me. I hope it'll be in the near future.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times.
We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day.
There's no other independent news channel in Russian. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia in English as well.
So that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TVRain Newsroom on YouTube, and let's take a look at our future together.